We are committed to you and getting a new perspective on the attack happening in Ukraine. Joining us now, retired Lieutenant Colonel and Pickens County resident Matthew Kutilek. He fought in Afghanistan and worked at the Pentagon. Thank you for joining us today, Matthew. And we want to get right to this. We just learned more than 57 people have died, more than 160 hurt in the first day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So, of course, we are thinking of those people there. But according to President Biden, he announced the deployment of 7,000 more U.S. troops to Germany today to strengthen our NATO forces, but he says they will not fight in Ukraine. Could this change?
Well, I think it could absolutely change, and I agree with you. It's very discouraging to see the deaths in Ukraine. In fact, last night I had trouble sleeping, and so I was texting with my good friend who is a colonel in the Ukrainian army. His name is Andriy, and I'm very good friends with him. And, you know, my heart goes out to them and the civilians in Ukraine. And I'm very concerned about the actions here in the United States of America. It seems like that our war drums are starting to beat again, and we're building up steam to get involved in a conflict that I'm not really sure we understand the purpose or have any clear indication of what our desires and outcomes are. You know, we just completed a 30-year debacle in Afghanistan where we had failed military strategy and failed foreign policy, and it cost American taxpayers $300 million a day. And so before we start employing American forces to the border of Ukraine and throughout Ukraine, you know, I would just hope that the leaders in charge in Washington, D.C. can clearly articulate what their purpose is and what exactly they will be doing and what the end game is.
Now, do you believe the new sanctions against Russian banks, its economy, the technology will stop Vladimir Putin from continuing this attack in Ukraine?
Well, you know, the sanctions are very challenging. When you have most European nations receive approximately 50 to 75% of their oil and gas from Russia. It's very challenging for anybody of the 30 NATO countries to impose sanctions on Russia when their entire economy and entire energy sector is dependent upon Russia. In regards to the United States, my concern is, are we really employing sanctions? In 2021, our oil imports from Russia tripled from what they were in 2019 and 2020 to over 209,000 billion barrels a day. If we really want to impose sanctions, let's not import a single more barrel of oil from Russia to the United States and become an energy independent country where we can then impose real sanctions against them and not be moved around like a puppet like many European countries are.
Yeah, we're already seeing that gas, those prices go up here in the upstate just today. Meanwhile, the president said he believes Putin could invade other countries because he wants to reestablish the Soviet Union. What can the United States do to limit this, stop this from happening, besides these more sanctions at this point?
Well, first of all, I think it's incumbent upon the President of the United States to go before a joint session of Congress, as it's required in the War Power Resolutions of 1973, and clearly articulate why we are sending American forces to another country and how it involves America's national security. Before we shed one drop of American blood, we need to make sure that the cost is worth it and that it's justified. And if we determine that it is, and a vote is taken on the joint floor of Congress, then we know where everyone stands and we can get behind it. But it also, you know, point out the fact that NATO has 30 members, most of which are in surrounding Russia in Europe. And it is their primary responsibility to serve as a head against Russian aggression. What are they doing? What forces are they going to commit? What finances are they going to commit to stop the spread of Putin and his military throughout Eastern Europe, throughout Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And there are reports of potential cyber threats to the United States and possibly our national grid, our banking system, according to Homeland Security. We know DOJ is watching this continuously, but of course, when you hear it, you get nervous. Should Americans be worried about this? How can we prepare for something like this?
Those are great questions. And I think really the question is, how does this involve the upstate of South Carolina, Greenville County, Oconee County, Spartanburg, Pickens County, and so on? You know, what does it mean to us? And again, yesterday I was very disappointed in Senator Lindsey Graham's flippant comments about how gas prices are going to rise, food prices are going to rise, the supply chain is going to be interrupted. I work in the manufacturing sector right now. Do we really want those things to happen to impact our economy here in the upstate of South Carolina? Can we really handle more disruption in the supply chain and in gas and oil? I mean, the price of natural gas is incredible right now. And when it comes to cyber attacks, our entire economy, our entire businesses are based off of cyber and computers and the internet. And if Russia goes after those, and certainly we will feel the impact here in the upstate of South Carolina. So is it really do we really understand the cost of getting involved in a conflict on the heavily disputed border of Ukraine and Russia?
And one final thing, you have experience, boots on the ground, being there fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq. What is your perspective of how long you think something like this will happen or continue to go on with Russia and Ukraine and potentially other countries?
Well, if history is any indication, those border regions have been disputed for thousands of years. And have we lost all perspective of history and the Holy Roman Empire? And in the last 200 years, the World War I, World War II, and the disputed territories. I mean, Ukraine wasn't even officially declared a country in 1991 once the fall of the Soviet Union occurred. My concern is the fact that have we learned anything from 20 years of Afghanistan where we spent $300 million a day in the name of what? National security, nation building. If we get involved in Eastern Europe, it's not just going to start and stop there. It's going to spread. And then we're committed again. And that means, most of all, it means the tragic loss of human life. Not only Americans, but Europeans, my friends in Ukraine, Russians, innocent civilians. Too often times the people in Washington, D.C. think that war is the problem. War is the solution? What's the problem? And that's simply not the case. I would hope that we can take a pause and really just have some discernment as to what our military strategy is, what our foreign policy is, so we make sure that anything that we do is worth the cost.
Absolutely. Thank you, Matthew Kutilek, for joining us, retired Lieutenant Colonel. We appreciate that perspective, and thank you for your service.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on.